Hello, beautiful light-filled souls, and Happy New Year. I am excited to be rolling into 2020, and I hope you are feeling peaceful and happy and playful and at peace with this new decade. First, I'd like to thank all of you for purchasing and responding to Angels in the OR. I had the best Christmas I've ever had because of your notes and gifts and cards and emails. I had so much fun showing up at my P.O. box and picking up these things and knowing that I'm connected to people around the world. Thank you so much for that. And then I also want to, in the future, encourage you to get your gifts out there and to share your message with the world. And I feel like I have more knowledge and experience in doing that now to create a course and some videos here to just give you some helpful information. I've published Angels in the OR the traditional way, but this month I just put out The Self, the Other, and God, a book of short poems. If you don't know my background, I teach English at the community college level. I've taught English and creative writing for over 20 years now, and my focus in graduate school was contemporary poetry and modern poetry. Love poetry, but I haven't pushed to get much of it out there into magazines. It's pretty competitive in the academic world. I was inspired this year by the book Milk and Honey. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was an international bestseller. Some academic poets criticize it because it is, lacking depth in places. Some of the lines are really short and without images, but it's consumable and interesting, and the whole book reads really quickly, and it's an artist's take on her life, and she wrote it the way she wanted to, and for a 21-year-old to revolutionize the world of poetry, I think it's fantastic. And she had so many students reading, and some parents were concerned that the content was mature because she writes about sexuality and assault and various issues. But as an English teacher, much of this content is out there in the media anyway, and it's so important for people to read. I have always pushed people to read, even if it is above their level or in some ways perhaps not appropriate. Parents can always have a conversation with their kids about that. But I had fun creating this poetry book. I looked through decades of poetry and just picked out the heart and soul of some of my poems and reflected on the relationship of self-knowing, knowing the self, knowing another, perhaps romantically, and then knowing God and that relationship with God. And much of my focus in poetry has been this occasional glimpse of the metaphysical world, and so that section was fun to work with. But I'd love it if you're not into poetry. This is a book that reads very quickly, and maybe you'll like it. If you are into poetry, you might be curious because you might want to do this with your own poems, or you might want to wait for the traditional book. But I am going to look for a home for it traditionally, and that can take a couple of years. But anyway, I want to jump right into the reason for this video, which is answering your questions about near-death experiences. And the first one I'll answer is just a quick answer. So many people have asked about what are some good books that I could recommend for Christians who are on the fence about wanting to learn about near-death experiences or not. And I can definitely recommend Revealing Heaven by John Price and Imagine Heaven by John Burke. I interviewed John Burke for the second annual Near-Death Experience Summit and really enjoyed his book, and those connections to the Bible are lovely. Revealing Heaven is also from a minister, and there's a longer subtitle. I'll put the links below, but both of these books are wonderful to delve into. So the next question is from someone who writes, while you were in your near-death experience, were you conducting your own thoughts? For example, when you were talking to the angels or God, did it feel like a dream, a lucid dream, or did you feel like you were in control of your thoughts? That's a great question. one, the environment is so different outside of the physical form. So I never for a moment felt like I was in a dream. I felt as soon as I left my physical body and saw my physical body on the operating table, I felt a sense of, this is my spiritual form, this is my consciousness. My consciousness is continuing on after death. And that was my first thought that just convinced me that this was not a dream. This was me participating in this altered reality. It's hard to find the words to describe what that experience is like because we're also entrenched in this physical experience. But the way I describe this physical experience now is everything feels slowed down. So did I have the same mind? I had an essence of me. I had the essential essence of me, but I almost feel like, and especially with the cold, I just feel slowed down in physical form. Yes, I can see auras sometimes. Yes, I can pick up on vibes, good vibes, bad vibes at times. Yes, there's great experiences that I can have in meditation, but over in that realm, it was pure. And I think that's what was so interesting, was that consciousness was so unfiltered, so profoundly different from this consciousness, but I did retain an awareness of myself. Even when I felt a oneness with all the people in Austin, or when I felt people's individual prayers, it was still me interacting in that realm. And that realm, is expansive. The healing light and love of the angels that came through was transformative and shocking on many levels, but it was clear that I was being transformed and interacting in that moment. So I hope that helps. Even in the presence of God, God's love was so overpowering and so beautiful and so amazing, but I did have this kernel of me in there that was in awe and wonder at God's love and this profound beauty of this moment. I realized that I'd changed and become more light-filled, but I realized at this core who I was going through this experience. I hope that answers that question. The next question is an important one to me, and I want to talk about this a whole lot more in the world. I hope to speak at rape crisis centers more often and speak to female veterans who have an assortment of traumas. I think that I have a lot in common because I was assaulted overseas, and there's this sense of complex trauma in my life. And so the idea of forgiveness, the writer writes, what is the balance between suggesting that we forgive all people and we are simply re-victimizing victims of crimes, when we ask them to forgive? Well, everyone is on a different trajectory and time frame and comes from an individual perspective. And that's what I hoped in writing a memoir, is I hope to open up more compassion in people's hearts for anyone's journey. If you walk a mile in my shoes, great. If you walk a mile in someone else's, the point is empathy for those who have suffered, because we've all suffered. I mean, we've all suffered in one way or another. It's also important to realize that everyone's on a different time frame. If you would have met me a year after sexual assault, I was a freaking mess. I was paranoid and not eating enough and just really highly traumatized at that time. 5 years into it, a different person, working with students and beginning my own healing. 10, 15 years into it, totally different. After writing a book about it and mentioning that, totally different experience. So yeah, you don't force victims to immediately forgive their accuser. And another part of all this is justice too. I worked in a school system when students came forward and they reported abuse. There's channels, there's the CPS here, there's authorities, there's counselors who get involved. There's a lot of people that get involved at that level, and some families press charges, some families don't. And so there's all kinds of ways that things shake out. I think what we can't do in society is what the Catholic Church has done, and that's just move priests from one parish to another you know, that there is some accountability that needs to happen. So, to the point of, are we re-victimizing people by encouraging them to forgive? I think planting the seeds of possible forgiveness someday is important. To force someone to immediately forgive an abuser, no, that can take decades. That can take a lifetime. That can take an instant. And I think part of the near-death experience and spiritual realization is that disconnection from this story and this life. So I know that there's great healing in being totally disconnected from Trisha's story, Trisha's life. Oh, what happened to Trisha? To here I am, a part of this whole, and still my individual self, but loved by God, granted enormous healing, and so is everyone else. And that is a form of disconnection that is very healing, and it's a connection to the other side, basically. So it's disconnection from this physical in this world that can be highly disappointing. I think, you know, you look around at what is happening in the world, it can be horrifying, but when you look to the eternal and you look to the spiritual, there is great healing. So I can say that personally, I'm going into 2020 and this next decade of my life feeling completely free and completely at peace with my life, with everything that's happened, and a profound sense of forgiveness, because all of these stories and all of these moments help me be a more empathetic, caring, compassionate teacher, to better understand what was going on in the lives of my students. I'm just a part of this world, as we all are. And we all have our stories, we all have our wounds. And to be set free from them is kind of miraculous. And does writing do that? It certainly places it in a different realm. So perhaps even moments when I was writing this book, there were some things I was holding on to and things that I'm not holding on to now. And that is a wonderful experience to be free. So do I wish that freedom for everyone? Yes, and everyone who is a victim. But do I know complex PTSD well? Do I know how many sessions of EMDR I've set through and how much work I've done and how I mean, my reactions to things may be like, they used to be way up here and now they're way down here, but there's still a reaction. And maybe it's completely normal that for the rest of my life, I'll be a little bit wary in cars. You know, like the physical trauma of the near-death experience is, it's a tough one. And that's why so many near-death experiencers always say to people, hey, I hope you awaken in a happy moment at a conference or just walking through nature. I don't want you to have to die to learn this knowledge from the other side. And luckily, lots of people don't. There's all types of experiences and spiritually transformative experiences. But thank you for your questions. Thank you for your support of Angels in the OR. Again, you made my Christmas amazing. And I'd love it if you picked up my poetry book. It's on Kindle and also as a paperback. And let me know if you're a fan of poetry, if you find this form too simple, or if it was enjoyable as a read, or if you're not a fan of poetry, if you just enjoyed this type of short poetry, because all of our brains are trained by social media, Instagram, and to read in these types of chunks. So that was the experiment, and thank you very much. May you be blessed, and may your 2020 be absolutely amazing.